All right. So we're looking for a pain point that's so big that the company or the customer, if they don't solve this pain point, they might die, right? So if it's a business, they might go out of business. If it's a consumer, right, like they don't have any other way to solve that problem potentially, right? Huge problems. In the industry, there's a lot of joke about like, is it a painkiller or is it a vitamin, right? So a vitamin being something that's like generally good and certainly has beneficial properties. But when you're in massive pain, a vitamin's not going to do you any good, right? You need a painkiller, right? And so, as you could probably guess, like people pay a lot of money for painkillers relative to just vitamins. And so the margins are really high and so on and so forth. And so you want to be thinking about like when you're looking at a company to invest in, is the pain point they're solving like really, really strong? Like are people desperate to get it fixed? Um, and do they not have any other really good solutions out there? Now, I'm going to pause there for a second and just say that pain points are really interesting things because things that are painful to us are maybe sometimes non-obvious. Um, so a great example of that is boredom, right? Like our generation is terrified of being bored in a lot of ways, right? Think about like how often we're on our phones watching YouTube, flipping through Instagram or TikTok, watching shows on Netflix, right? Like there's always like something grabbing at our attention because we don't want to be bored, right? So even something like boredom can be like a meaningful pain point. But that's the first thing. Look at the businesses that you're evaluating, right? And really try to understand the pain point. Go talk to customers, maybe, right? Or potential customers, and really try to understand from their perspective, is the pain point that this company is solving like really that meaningful to them or not? Is it a nice to have like a vitamin, or is it like a must have, right? Sometimes like we've met with companies and we'll talk to their customers and their customers are like, yeah, this is like a cool product, but there's like 10 other solutions out there. And really it doesn't really, what they're doing, it doesn't solve this like massive pain point, but they're great. And other times we meet with companies and they're like, we love talking to investors about this company because we will do anything we can to make sure this company has the funding it needs in order to be successful, because it has been such a huge blessing in our lives and has relieved us of so much like pain, right? So that's the kind of response we like to hear. All right. So once you've kind of figured out the pain point, like, okay, this company has identified a customer that is solving like a real pain point in the market, right? The next thing you have to think about is like, what is the strategy that they're using in order to solve that pain point, and also to capture the value that they're creating by solving it, right? So there's this great story about Ray Kroc. That's the guy in this picture, who was kind of the CEO of McDonald's and really built it into what it is today. And he's at a party with a bunch of his friends, and he asked them, "What business am I in?" And they all look at him kind of weird, and they're like, "You're in the burger business, obviously, right? You sell burgers through McDonald's." And he's like, "No, not in the burger business. I'm in the real estate business." The reason he said that he was in the real estate business was twofold. So one, if you think about like, what does McDonald's provide? What pain point do they solve at the end of the day? Any ideas?
Convenience.
Convenience, right? It's not like they sell the best hamburger in the world. Like it's fine, right? But it's convenience, right? It's like they're in great locations that are easy to get access to. The product is always the same, so you always know exactly what you're getting. There's no like fear that like you might have an experience that you're not accustomed to, right? A bad experience. Like you always know you're going to get the same kind of mediocre experience from McDonald's. It's very fast, right? So there are a lot of things that are great about it. So that's part of it. right? And so real estate, it's all about location, location, location. So he had to be really good, and McDonald's has to be really good about picking great real estate. But the other piece of it, so that's part of the value creation, right? But then there's also the value capture side of it as well, right? So I create all this value. Hopefully I don't just give it all away. Hopefully I'm able to get the customer to pay me for some of that value I'm creating for them. And so in this case, the customer for McDonald's is not me and you going in to get our hamburger and fries. It's the franchisees, right? So as a franchisee, McDonald's provides a brand, a supply chain, systems, training. They help you pick out the real estate, like all of these things so that you can set up a restaurant and have a very high degree of likelihood that you'll be successful to some degree, right? And that's ultimately what McDonald's is selling. And so the way that they capture that value that they're creating for the franchisee is they own the real estate, and then they lease the real estate at a pretty high rate, like much higher than market. They release that real estate to the franchisee. And so that's how they're able to capture the value that they are creating for the franchisee, right? So it's all about kind of value creation and value capture. And in order to understand that, you need to understand that the business model and the business that the company is in, and to know whether or not it's the right one for that business. Now, in the McDonald's case, that works out really well for them because they need to know, in order for them to be successful, they want to pick the best real estate. And so they might as well own the real estate. And then they need to control the franchisee. And so they can use the real estate and the lease agreement as a way to control them, to make sure that they maintain the quality standards that they need to meet in order to create this very convenient experience that's the same everywhere, right? Does that make sense? All right, so first, right, understand the pain point. Who feels the pain point, not the paint point, that's funny. And how does the company solve the pain point? So I've got a couple examples here. Let's talk about Facebook. So what business is Facebook in?
The advertisement and data collection business.
That's right. They're in the advertising and data collection business. And so who's their customer?
Consumer brands, and I guess anybody else who really would like use emails and trends and all that other stuff.
Yeah, it's basically like advertisers, right? Whether it's the company themselves or an advertising agency, but whoever it is, it's somebody that's advertising, right? And the pain point that they feel is that without somebody like Facebook, I just throw a bunch of money out there and cross my fingers and hope, right? That some of my marketing dollars are spent getting in my product in front of the right people, right? But I know that like probably half my dollars are not going to the right people, getting in front of the right people. What Facebook does, so that's a pain point, right? 50% is kind of what people say of their dollars are kind of wasted in advertising and marketing. The innovation of Facebook is that they have enough data that you can really hone in on your target customer. So you're not wasting as many dollars on people that aren't interested in your product, right? That's the pain point. That's a pretty big pain point at the end of the day, right? So that's how Facebook does it. They solve that pain point by convincing all of us to generously give them lots of access to our personal information. Then they in turn take that information and effectively sell it to advertisers. This is where the old joke comes from. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? Okay, let's talk about Lyft. So who is Lyft's customer? Anybody? or what business is Lyft in?
Anyone who needs a ride.
Anybody who needs a ride? Okay, they're in the transportation business. Anybody else have a different perspective? Okay, so there's two different customers for Lyft, right? Right. One is the person that needs a ride. The other person is the person that's giving the ride, right? Lyft at the end of the day is not too dissimilar from McDonald's with their franchisees, right? So if you think about it from this perspective, the pain point is I don't have a job, but I have a car, and I don't have the ability to work like set hours. I need something that's flexible. How can I earn money given my current situation? Well, I could sign up and I could be a Lyft driver, right? So with Lyft, I, as the driver, am their customer. And if you think about what Lyft offers, right? If I were to set up my own taxi company, it'd be really hard, right? I'd have to get insurance. I'd have to get registered. I'd have to have some way to collect payments, right? Like a credit card machine or whatever. I'd have to, and the biggest one is I'd have to go find customers, which would be really hard, right? Like, I'm going to go out and spend like $10,000 putting up a billboard with my name on there, right? And then I got to convince them that they should trust me as a taxi driver, effectively, right? But Lyft takes care of like all of those things, right? And they do it really effectively. So very quickly, I can set up essentially a taxi business. Lyft will send me customers. They provide the payment structures. They provide the insurance. They provide all the things I need to get up and running almost immediately, right? And so if you think about it, like Lyft's tagline even is your friend with a car, right? Like they're kind of like targeting even like the driver, right? The driver is the friend. So and a lot of the things that they put effort and energy into are all about creating a great experience for their drivers, with the belief that if they can do a good job providing a great experience for their drivers, the drivers will be able to do a great job bringing in customers, and it will create a virtuous flywheel where the more drivers you have, the more customers you have, and the more customers you have, the more drivers you have. Yes, Lyft does ultimately market their services to you and me as potential passengers in their vehicles. But if you think about it, it's almost like that's their job, right? That's what the drivers are paying them to do, is to go find customers for them, right? And if you look at the actual business model for Lyft charges in two ways. The first one is they charge a flat fee for every ride. So that's just like, hey, you want to be on our platform, you pay a flat fee, right? Then they also charge a commission. And the commission there is almost like saying, hey, we went and we found you this passenger. And so because we found him, we should get a commission on the revenue that passenger brings. And so we're going to take a small cut of the transaction, right? That's how they've structured the business model to capture some of this value that they're creating. All right. So this is one of my favorite questions. What is business strategy? Oftentimes people say, oh, well, business strategy, like it's the plan that we have in place that will help us succeed, or it's the thing that makes us unique. And I think all of those are true to an extent. To me, though, business strategy at its heart, at its core, is the art of creating a monopoly. Now, monopolies generally have kind of a negative connotation, right, in today's society. But the reality is that every business wants to be a monopoly. And the reason, especially in venture capital, and the reason for that is because monopolies can charge higher prices and capture more profits. They can then use those profits to reinvest in their business and grow even faster. And so as a venture capitalist, that's what you want. You want to be investing in companies that can create some sort of monopoly because they will generate the most profits and be worth the most over the long run. And so as you're evaluating your companies, you want to be able to see whether or not the company is creating some sort of monopoly. Now, there's basically two different types of ways to create a monopoly. The first one is what we call differentiation. So differentiation means kind of like what it sounds like. You're trying to create something that's different than somebody else, right? So Apple is a great example of that, right? Their products are very different than other smartphones that are out there, right? They've put a lot of money into their brand. And if somebody knocks off their brand, they sue them, right? Like they are very protective around creating this like unique, different experience, right? That's premium, right? So that's differentiation. You add more features, more benefits. It's more prestigious. It's more luxury, right? It does more things. All of those things can be related back to differentiation. The other way that you can create a monopoly is through what's called a low-cost structure or a low-cost strategy. And in that case, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make it very hard for somebody to copy like your manufacturing process or your ability to deliver product, right? You have this like low cost advantage that's very hard for others to replicate. So a good example of that would be, let's see, like Southwest, right? Southwest has a low cost strategy. They only use one type of plane. They don't fly international. They don't have TVs in the back of the seats like a Delta does or some of the other airlines. You have to book your flight through Southwest's own portal, like that you can't buy it on Expedia or these other platforms, right? So like it's very much focused on low cost. And because of that, generally speaking, Southwest can undercut companies like Delta on the price of their tickets, right? That's their whole strategy. And it's really hard for Delta to copy that because they would have to basically get rid of all the things that customers love about Delta, right? Couldn't fly international, don't have the TVs, right? Like, got to get rid of the food packages that they hand out. All of those different things. So that's low cost. And then you can have kind of like this continuum of how many buyers that your product applies to. So the way I like to illustrate this table or this graph right here is with shoes. So I think we all wear shoes, we all buy shoes, we all are familiar with shoes. So if you have a company that has a broad differentiation strategy, right? You're targeting a lot of different types of customers and your products are generally high quality. What's a good example of a shoe company with that strategy? Anybody?
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, of course. So think about shoe brands. What shoe brand out there targets a broad range of customers and has a relatively like good product, like nice, like high quality product? Nike. Yep, 100%. That's the one, right? Nike. You can buy anything from Nike, right? In terms of shoes, you can buy golf shoes, tennis shoes, basketball shoes, running shoes, soccer cleats, running cleats, right? Like ski boots, like you can buy like all kinds of stuff through Nike, right? And generally their products are pretty high quality for what you're getting, right? Okay, what about a focused differentiation strategy? So you don't target a lot of different buyers, you just target one specific type of buyer and you have a very high-end product.
Allbirds.
Okay, Allbirds might be one. Who's the niche market?
Like comfort, like environmentally conscious consumers.
Yep. Environmentally conscious consumers that care about comfort. Yep. And they only sell like a few different styles, right? It's pretty limited. What's another one? Any other ideas?
Would Gucci work? Or Louis
Okay,
Vuitton?
like yeah, Gucci or Louis Vuitton shoes, those could work. What about like Yeezys? Would those fit a little bit? They might fit. There's another brand like for women's shoes, like Jimmy Choo's, right? Really high-end stilettos, right? So those are all good examples of like a focused differentiation. What about low cost, like an overall low cost leadership? In other words, it's a very affordable line of shoes, but they have lots of different shoes. There's a company that filed bankruptcy a few years ago that I'm thinking of.
Skechers has a lot of products as well, right? So would they consider, or would you consider them being in like the medium range?
So we'll come back to Skechers. I don't think Skechers really fits in this particular category. Anybody familiar with Payless? So Payless is like a good example, right? Like you could go into Payless and they had like sandals and running shoes and dress shoes, and you know, they had a bunch of different stuff, and they were all like pretty affordable, right? And that was Payless's whole strategies. We are going to provide very, very low cost shoes. What about a focused low cost strategy? So it's a niche market and it's low cost. And I'll tell you right now, if you can think of a brand that fits here, you're probably not thinking of the right kind of shoe company.
Is it Converse?
No, I think Converse probably used to be in that bucket, but they've kind of moved up the ladder. So have you ever been to like a beach town, or even like going to Walmart and you see those like really, really cheap flip-flops that are like a layer of foam and then like just some plastic things to hold onto your toes? Like there are companies, but that's all they do is they just produce these really, really, really cheap flip-flops, right? As cheaply as they possibly can and sell them. That would be an example of a company with a low cost niche market, right? All we do is make flip-flops and we, ship them out worldwide, right? A best cost strategy was mentioned earlier, and I think that's like a Skechers, right? They're not as high end as a Nike, but they're not as cheap as what you'd find at Walmart. They have more than they've got dress shoes and walking shoes and running shoes, but they don't have like, soccer cleats or whatever, what have you, right? So it's kind of right in the middle. So you want to figure out like, where does your company, what's their strategy? And I'll tell you what, in venture capital, you're actually looking for a company that maybe has both differentiation and low cost. So a good example of that would be like Facebook, right? Think about from a Facebook perspective. If you want to compete with Facebook and sell to advertisers, right? You've got to go out and you've got to get an immense amount of data on people, right? And unless you figure out a way like Facebook has to convince people to give you that data for free, it's going to be very expensive for you to get that data, right? But you need that data because otherwise the advertisers aren't going to come to you, right? Or they're not going to pay you very much. So you could go the opposite direction, like a billboard, and say, okay, look, our cost is really low, but we can't give you any personalization, right? We can't help you target the ads, right? So that's an example where Facebook, they've convinced all of us to give the data to them for free, right? So their cost structure is incredibly low, but then they're also differentiated because the type of advertising that they can provide is really, really personalized and very specific to the end consumer. So that's the ideal, is if you can figure out a company that uses both sides of that strategy or both of those strategies. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. Any questions?
Can you please revisit the overall low cost leadership strategy?
Yeah, so that would be like Payless shoes. And that's, or another example is like Walmart, right? You walk down the shoe aisle in Walmart, like all the shoes are like, none of them really have any brands to speak of. They're all really affordable. They're not super high quality, right? But you're not really paying for quality. You're just paying for something that works. But Walmart's got a lot of different shoe types, right? You can get sandals and boots and working boots and running shoes and tennis shoes and all kinds of stuff there. So that's kind of broad range of buyers go to Walmart to buy those shoes, right? And they're focused on being the very low cost as opposed to the very highest quality.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So let's move on to markets. So Ben Horowitz, arguably one of the top venture investors in the country or world, is quoted as saying, "We invest in college dropouts with insane ideas going after tiny markets with no way to monetize." Does that sound like a winning investment strategy to you? What is he getting at here? What is he actually saying? Can anybody think of a very, very successful company that's now publicly traded?
Facebook.
Yeah, maybe Facebook. Facebook's a good example. How about one that just went public late last year?
DraftKings. I don't know.
Yeah.
Airbnb. Oh,
Right? Think about Airbnb. Like you can read about different VCs that looked at Airbnb in the early days. And they're like, so let me get this straight. You're going to have people that are going to come in and they're going to sleep on the couch in other people's homes, and they're complete strangers, and they're going to pay for that privilege. And they're like, I can't even imagine the liability to begin with, right? So Airbnb made the rounds and was passed on by just tons of different VCs, some of the top VCs out there, right? Insane ideas. And then think about on top of that, like how many people were paying for the privilege to sleep on a bed or a couch in someone else's home, right? That market didn't even exist. It was teeny tiny, right? So, but Andreessen Horowitz eventually was an investor in Airbnb and a very, very big supporter. And what they're saying here, right, what Ben is really getting at is he doesn't really invest in tiny markets with no way to monetize. That just might be the way it looks like at the time of investment. But what you're looking for is huge potential markets, right? Where a new company could come in and disrupt the way that it has been operating in the past. So if you think about the hospitality industry and market, right, that is a huge market, right? And Airbnb has come in and taken a chunk of the hospitality market. But here's the other interesting thing that Airbnb has done. They've also grown the hospitality market significantly, because now you don't have to fork over 100, 200, 300 bucks a night to stay somewhere when you travel. In some cases, you can stay on somebody's couch for as low as $10 a day, right? And so that has opened up this huge opportunity for people to now be able to travel and be able to afford to travel. In fact, you could argue that like some of the fascination and passion that millennials and Gen Z has around travel is really made possible due to Airbnb, that has really lowered the cost of travel, right? So when you're evaluating your companies, even if the market appears small, you want to be looking at like, what are the potential markets for them to enter into? Now, that begs the question, how big? How big does a market have to be for a VC to justify investing? So what do you think? All right, so we're going to do, oops. let's see. So let's say we have a venture fund, right? Remember our prior example where we made 10 investments? Well, we want every single investment we make to have the potential to return the fund. So on that first deal, or on any deal that we do, we're going to invest $10 million. And if you assume that for $10 million, by the time the company goes public or gets acquired, we will own 10% of the company, right? Then that means that we need $1 billion exit, right? That's the value of the company when it gets acquired or goes public. Because if we do that, then that will give us $100 million of profit, right? That's what we're targeting. Y'all, hopefully y'all remember that exercise that we went through on the very first day of training. Then it begs the question, what does a company have to look like for them to generate $1 billion exit? Well, right now is kind of a unique time in history where revenue multiples that are at extreme highs. But historically, most companies that are growing aggressively trade at around 5 to 6x revenue. That means that if you're generating $100 million in revenue, you could multiply that by 5 to 6, right? And your company would be worth $500 to $600 million on the public markets or at if it were acquired. So what does that mean? That means if I need to get to $1 billion, I need to be generating somewhere in the $150 to $200 million in revenue, right? That should be my target. Well, if I have a really great disruptive company, then success might look like 10 to 15% market share. Now, achieving 10 to 15% market share is amazing. That's really hard to do. But it is theoretically possible, right? You look at companies all the time, like Airbnb easily probably has about 10 to 15% market share, right, of travel, right, and hospitality. So it's possible. And that's really what you're kind of looking for is in your respective market, can that company, if it is quote unquote successful, achieve 10 to 15% market share? And if it can, then in this case, that would mean what? What size market would I have to have in order to generate 150 to 200 million in revenue with 10 to 15% market share? Probably going to be about $1 billion, right? Because 150 million divided by 1 billion is going to equal 10%, right? That's my 10% market share. So that means effectively that your market for venture capitalists has to be at least $1 billion. And if you want your company to have the potential of being even more successful, it probably needs to be worth a couple $1 billion in size, right? Because as the size of the market goes up, the market share requirement can come down, right? Okay, so that's ultimately what you're looking for, is at least $1 billion in size and growing, hopefully, right? All right, let's talk a little bit about TAM, SAM, and SOM. I feel like a lot of students find this confusing, what the difference is between the TAM, the SAM, and the SOM. And so I like using the example of a Chinese restaurant in downtown Atlanta. So if you have a Chinese restaurant in downtown Atlanta, what do you think the TAM is? How would you define it?
Everyone who likes Chinese food.
Okay. Could be everyone who likes Chinese food in the world?
Or, sorry, in Atlanta. So it would be anyone who eats would be total addressable market, right? Anybody who
Yeah,
just
so-
eats food.
Yeah, so everyone that eats food in Atlanta could be the total addressable market, right? Yeah. Okay, so what's the SAM? SAM is based on your current business model.
Something like if people want fast dine or fast food or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, so maybe you run like a fast casual, or maybe it's a sit down, or maybe it's fast food, right? Whatever your business model is, there's going to be some limiting factors there. So like people that eat food that want it fast or that want a sit down experience, right? You probably also include people that like Chinese food into that requirement too, because that's part of your business model, right? We sell Chinese food. Okay, and then what about SOM? What's the difference between SAM and SOM?
Would it be like the size of the store, or like?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So like how many people can you fit into your restaurant, right? How many meals can you produce per hour, right? Whatever it might be. So so those would be the practical limits. Plus maybe you only have one location. So if you open up a second location, right, then that would expand the limits of your business model. Okay, so in this case, you want to be looking at companies that probably have a SAM that's at least $1 billion, right? Because that would be hypothetically like how big they could get to in the near future. Now, the TAM is important too, because maybe over time they could expand and not just offer Chinese food, but maybe they also offer Mexican food or an American food or whatever it might be, right? Okay. So the other factor you got to look at is what's driving the market growth, right? You want to be investing in companies that are operating in markets that are growing, because it's a lot easier to grow your business if the overall market is growing, right? Than it is if the market is stagnant or declining. Because in a declining market or a flat market, the only way you grow is by stealing market share from other people. And then it becomes really aggressive and hard to do, right? So you want to be looking at markets that are growing. Now, there are a lot of things that can impact the growth of a market for good or bad. So one example would be like demographics and population. An easy example of this is the baby boomer generation, which, they're getting older. And so they're going to start demanding more healthcare services, for example, right? Or they already are demanding more healthcare services. And so healthcare as a market is growing, largely due to the demographics and population. It might be growing due to technological advances. Think about internet speeds, right? Today, there are all kinds of businesses that are possible because our internet speeds are fast enough that they can support those different technologies. So for example, like this right here, I have this virtual reality headset. It's pretty cool, but this wouldn't be possible without high-speed internet, because I have to be able to download all of the different software that goes onto it, right? And they're really big files. And so I need really good internet, right? So as internet rolls out and it gets faster, you've got the adoption of virtual reality that starts to go up. It could be the product life cycle, right? So when a product is brand new and really exciting, it can grow really fast. But as everybody gets it, then it starts to taper off. So cell phones are a good example of this, right? In the early days, 20 years ago or so, cell phones were just growing incredibly fast because not everybody had one, but they were super exciting and useful. And so everybody was buying them. Today, pretty much everybody has a cell phone. And so, the market's just not growing. In fact, it's pretty stagnant, right? There could be external factors like laws. So you think about the marijuana industry, right? Historically, it's been relatively small because it's been an illicit activity. And as states and likely the federal government will soon pass laws that make it legal, you've seen a tremendous number of marijuana-based companies pop up and start thriving. And so that overall market has started to grow, right? You could also have network effects. So network effects are some of the most interesting from a growth and a strategy perspective. If you think about fax machines back in the day, if you guys even know what a fax machine is, so old. But the first fax machine wasn't useful to anybody at all. But as soon as somebody got a second fax machine, then they were beneficial, right? Now those two people could fax documents back and forth. And then when the third person got it, it was even more beneficial.
Popular and common in the US that isn't very popular and common here is.
So part of the benefit, like the way network effects work, is each incremental person that or customer that uses the product makes it more valuable for everybody, right? And so network effects usually mean that a market grows really slow, and then it just spikes because pretty soon everybody has to be on it. So if you look at the growth of companies like TikTok and Facebook and others that have these network effects, right, it can be really powerful, and it can also be very hard to disrupt them. But from a market growth perspective, if a market has some sort of network effect tied to it, right, you would expect kind of slow growth in the early days and then accelerating exponential growth later on. All right, and then the last one I want to touch on is customs and culture. So I don't know if any of you recognize any of those things at the bottom of the page, like Digipets or Tickle Me Elmo. Tickle Me Elmo was a product that was sold during Christmas time a number of years ago and was so popular and so hard to get your hands on that there were Tickle Me Elmo selling for like $10,000, just kind of crazy. And then Christmas hit, and the day after, nobody cared about Tickle Me Elmo anymore, and it just fell off. There are all kinds of things that are really trendy due to culture. Another one that's kind of interesting is in China. There was a huge drop off in the birth rate in 1999. And social scientists couldn't figure it out. They didn't know what was going on. And then in 2000, it spiked. And the reason for that was because the year 2000 was the year of the dragon, which was this cultural thing that matters a lot in China, right? And so all of these mothers were delaying the birth of their children until the year 2000. And when you couple that with the fact that I believe at the time they were only allowed to have one child, it was like, I only get to have one, and I want it born in the year of the dragon because that's the luckiest year, right? So you can have all these interesting phenomena that can impact kind of the growth of markets. Ultimately, I would say this last one, customs and culture, is one to really watch out for because it can be kind of dangerous. You don't want to invest in Snuggies at the height of like Snuggies, right? When everybody's buying them, and then they just fall off the face of the earth because, you know, they're no longer cool or trendy or whatever, and it goes away. So you just want to be careful about investing in things that are trendy and not like long-term valuable. All right, so that brings us to the end of market. Any questions? Okay, so just to reiterate, as you're preparing your investment analysis, I would spend time understanding like your market size. How big is it? How fast is it growing, and what is driving that growth, right? It's also beneficial to talk about the customer and why the product that your company is offering is really the right one for that market, right? Okay, so let's talk about competition for a minute, and then we'll wrap up. So the way I like to think about competition is to first understand what's called the value chain. So a lot of people will talk about Porter's 5 forces, and they apply Porter's 5 to an individual company. In reality, Porter's 5 forces actually applies best to a value chain. Now, a value chain is simply every step along the process at which value is being created or value is being added. So a perfect example of this is you think about like paper, right? Like this postcard. So this postcard, if you take it all the way back, starts with just like a piece of land. And then a farmer plants seeds, they grow a tree, they harvest. So these are all different steps along the value chain or supply chain, right? They chop down the tree, they turn the tree into paper pulp, they turn that paper pulp into big giant reams of paper. Then they take those giant reams of paper and they cut it out, and then they print on that paper, and then that becomes this postcard that gets mailed out, right? So all these different steps at which value is added. So raw materials, manufacturing, distribution. And by the way, this can apply for software. It can apply to all kinds of things in business. So in this example, we'll talk about a ham sandwich. So we can pretend we have this business that makes ham sandwiches. That's what they manufacture. Their suppliers make the bread that we use in the sandwiches, among other things. And then we have distribution. So these would be restaurants maybe that sell our sandwiches. If you only have one supplier of bread in the world, right, that supplier of bread probably has a lot of power over you, right? And they can kind of charge whatever they want for that bread. If you have a lot of buyers of your sandwich that are distributing it to end customers, then none of those buyers probably have very much power over you, because if one doesn't want to pay you what you think the sandwich is worth, there might be somebody else that will, right? A lot of different buyers. So relatively low buyer power. You also have this concept called rivalry. So this would be like other companies that make ham sandwiches or maybe even turkey sandwiches. And then you have a threat of entrance. So this would be like, how hard is it to set up a company that makes ham sandwiches? Probably not too difficult. And then you have this idea of substitutes. So you have this whole other product that solves the same pain point in a similar way, but resides in its own value chain, like pizza, right? So if the pain point I'm solving with a ham sandwich is I need portable food that I can use my hands to eat, right? That's what a ham sandwich provides. So does a slice of pizza, right? All right. So why do I talk about all this stuff for competition? Well, these are all the different competitive threats that you might face as a company. One, there might be companies that already exist that provide the same product or service you do, right? You need to be aware of those and understand how your product is superior or different, right? You might have the threat of new entrants where companies might decide, hey, we can make a ham sandwich too really easily, and they could enter your market, right? So you want to be able to understand how hard is it for a new company to replicate what you're doing. You might also have other solutions that are solving that same pain point, like in our example, pizza, right? So you want to be aware of those alternative solutions because they can kind of blindside you as well. A good example of this is like movie theaters, who are totally blindsided by companies like Facebook, right? Because if your pain point is solving this entertainment and boredom pain, right? Well, a lot of people were spending a lot of time on Facebook, and that time was time that they weren't spending at the movie theaters. And so movie theaters struggled. So you want to be thinking about like, what is the pain point that it's being solved? And are there other ways that it could be solved that are a threat? Now, in terms of buyer power and supplier power, those are important because your suppliers or your buyers could move into your market potentially pretty easily. So, for example, if I make bread, how hard is it really for me to slice that bread and put some meat between it, right? Probably not that hard. So you could have suppliers that could move into your business and be a real threat. And so you want to be aware of them as well. All right. So hopefully that gets your brain thinking about like all the different types of companies that could compete with your company. The next thing to ask is like, what factors about your business will determine who wins, right? And so you need to understand the customer and the pain point and like why the market even exists to begin with. And then you need to understand how each company solves that pain point, right? So Hilton Hotels and Airbnb both help solve the pain point of I need a place to stay, right? But Hilton does it with like, hey, we provide very clean structure. You know what you're going to get. You know it's going to be clean. You know, like it's going to be in a good location. There's going to be parking. You know, all of these things. And there's like, you know, some security there. Airbnb, on the other hand, solves the pain point by saying, hey, maybe we're gonna offer a cheaper option, and maybe we're gonna provide a very different experience, right? Like you can live in a castle or whatever, right? Something that that Hilton may not offer, right? So different types of value. So then you need to understand, like, what does the customer actually care about? Do they care about having a very clean, you know, reliable experience, or do they want to have a new experience, right? Or do they care about like a cheaper solution? So spending time understanding that will help you determine like which solution is going to be better. Now, if you're saying like for business travelers, which of those two solutions is better, it's probably the Hilton Hotels, because business travelers, right, they're focused on coming in, doing their business and getting out, right? And so they don't want anything that could trip them up. They want like a very consistent, clean experience. But somebody that's traveling for fun, they may say, no, I really want to have a really fun, unique experience that creates memories that I can take with me throughout the rest of my life, right? So it just kind of depends on the customer. And so you'll want to spend some time really understanding your customer to know, you know, which company will succeed. This can be a really effective way to map out your competition and how your company is unique relative to the others. So this is a slide I took out of a company deck that I thought was interesting. What they were doing was they had built this platform to help companies, especially small businesses, manage their social media outreach. And what you had is, on one hand, you had single product focused companies. So it'd be companies that would do one thing very, very well, right? Like Buffer. Buffer is really good at just scheduling when you're going to post to Facebook, right? And so you can, at the beginning of the month, you can just say, here's all my posts on Facebook, and just post them on these dates at this time. And that's all Buffer did. That was it, right? They're very focused on that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you had companies that offered a more comprehensive solution. So it was like, we'll help you post, schedule your post, we'll help you find content, we'll help you do all these different things to manage your whole, we'll make it so multiple teams can interact, we'll do all these different things to help you manage your social media. So that's one spectrum. And then the other spectrum was open or closed. And an open platform would be one that would engage with lots of different other technologies and integrate with them, right? So Buffer, for example, was very open. Like it would work on Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and all these different social media platforms, and it would also work on Macs and Windows, Chrome and Internet Explorer and all those different platforms, right? So it integrated with a lot of things. And then you had other things that said, no, we don't integrate with anybody else. We contain it all ourselves. We provide all of the solutions, right? And part of the idea with this company, Cuberhood, was they were like, what we're going to do is we're going to provide this all-in-one solution, but we're going to make it so that it's open. So we will plug and play with all these great point solutions and bring them into one like comprehensive solution where you just log in once and you can see everything and it all like integrates nicely together. So like that's how they were trying to explain like how they were different from all of the other competitors, right? So this is called a strategy map. It can be really helpful in terms of explaining how your company is unique relative to the competition. And these axes could be all kinds of things. Maybe the axis is like quality, or it's price, or it's convenience, or it's like ease of use, right? And so they can be like great ways to be able to show like all the competitors are either focusing on this or that, and we do both, or whatever it might be. Or maybe like nobody does what we do at all because they're all focused on kind of the left side of the quadrant, and we're creating something brand new, right? So like Airbnb, right? It's like the spectrum could be like a hotel or couch surfing, right? And there's like nobody that operates in the couch surfing side. So like Airbnb is there, right? And then you could put something like cost, right? And you could say, well, Airbnb is much more affordable than going online and renting somebody's entire house and signing up for like a 1-month lease agreement or something like that, right? If all you need is like a few nights stay. Okay, so just some helpful questions that I find helpful, and I'm trying to go through competition, especially from an analysis perspective, because you could spend forever looking into all different kinds of potential competitive threats, and you really don't have time to do all of that. So you got to be able to hone in on what's most important. So the first thing is, who are the top competitors? Like, who are the biggest threats to this business? This would be companies that are already operating in the market or that could move into your market, right? The next is, what are the factors that will determine who will win? Well, those factors could be different things. Sometimes they're related to the product, right? Like, our product is so much better than the competitors. Sometimes it's related to distribution, right? So if I'm Apple, right, I might have an advantage on distribution because I've got all these app stores or Apple stores out there, right? And so it's really easy for people to find my product and buy it, right? Whereas if I start up a new smartphone company, that's going to be hard to compete with because I don't have that same level of distribution. So figuring out like, what are the factors that will determine who will win? How is your company positioned against the competition? Like, what makes you unique relative to them? And then what are your company's sources of competitive advantage? What keeps them from being copied or selling to the same customer? So going back to Apple is very good at building a great brand, right? And if you're somebody who loves Apple, you're going to go back and buy Apple products. And you're not going to look at any of the other products that are out there because none of them really do what Apple does for you, right? Especially if you already have like a MacBook and an iPhone and they talk to each other and it's really nice. You're probably going to go and buy an Apple Watch. You're not going to buy like a Samsung watch because it doesn't integrate and talk to your other products as well, right? On the copied side, maybe you say, hey, we have a cost advantage here because we're like Facebook and people just give us their information for free. And so we have this huge cost advantage and people aren't willing to give that same information for free to other types of platforms. So we have an advantage from being copied, right? So it could be a lot of different things, but hone in on like what makes your company unique, what makes it hard for other companies to do what they do and to sell to that same customer. All right, so just some guidance on your what to include in your investment analysis. Business model and strategy. Talk about like, what is the pain point? Who is the customer and how does the company solve the pain point for them, right? Get like really specific there. The more you can help the judges understand the pain point that the company is solving and who their customer is and how the company solves the pain point, right? The more they're going to understand the rest of your analysis. So make sure that you make that part crystal clear. And then also explain how the company makes money. Do they charge every time they sell a product? Do they charge a subscription? Do they charge another third party for the service, like an insurance company, if it's a medical device product, for example. Talk about the business model. How do they make money? Next, talk about the market size. How big is the market? Talk about the TAM, the SAM, and the SOM, and explain your reasoning on how you calculated each one, the TAM, the SAM, and the SOM. Talk about how quickly the market is growing and what is driving that growth. Like, what are the main factors driving growth? Next, you're going to talk about competition. So who are the top competitors, right? You're going to go out and you look at all the different competitors that are out there. And you're going to talk about like how your company is positioned against them, and why you think that they'll win. And then also talk about like what makes the company unique, like what kind of competitive advantage do they have that keeps other companies from doing what they do. Yeah. So those are all kind of the major questions that you're going to want to definitely answer in your final deliverable for your investment analysis. Any questions on any of that? Clear as mud.
And just to be clear, this is what you would recommend we do with all three of our companies, of the companies we're submitting?
No, what I'm saying is, well, you're probably going to pick one of them, right? You're going to pick one of these companies and you're going to dig in deep on the business model and the market size and the competition. These are like the minimum of the things you need to include in your analysis of that one company. So you don't need to do it for all three, just for one, the one you're going to submit.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Are the PowerPoint slides going to be available after this, or?
So we do a recording and we send out the recording via email. We're trying to figure out why it's not posting on our website, but you can watch all of the videos, the trainings on the Utah site, because for some reason our website is hosting those videos. I don't know why, but it's all the same training.
Okay, thank you.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? These are good questions. Okay, so just to hit some dates and then we'll open it up for Q&A with teams and so forth. So just a reminder, 28th, that's wrong. Anyways, your next deliverable after today is to submit the 3 companies. Let's do these this weekend. The form is really simple. It's just a simple, like, here's the name of the company, website, and then like just a very, very brief couple sentences why you like it, and what they do. It's not designed to be like big and tedious. It's just designed to force you to move things along. So submit that this weekend, and then we will do training next week. And then after that, it's time to, if you haven't already, so I would right away, as quickly as possible, pick one of those 3 companies and start digging in on your due diligence, analyzing the business model and the market and the competition, and then the other topics we're going to cover next week. So yeah, just dates. March 13th is when the 3 companies are due, and then your investment analysis is due on the 27th. So you got to get moving on that. Now, for Atlanta, the investment analysis can be just a pitch deck. It doesn't have to be a write-up. It can just be a presentation. So, and then on the 29th, we'll announce the top 5 teams and pair them with mentors. And then we have the final presentations will be due on the 5th. So you'll have time to go back in, make changes, meet with your mentor, get feedback, and then make changes. And then on the 7th will be our final event. So. Any questions on any of that?
Hey, Peter, it's Sky.
Hey.
About how many teams are there?
I believe we're at 14 teams. Is that right, Christy, or is it more than that?
I need to double check. I'll get back to you in the chat in a second.
It's at least 14 teams.